I didn't expect it to happen. I wasn't even looking for it. But life has a funny way of pulling you in directions you never saw coming. And before you know it, you've crossed lines you swore you'd never cross. That's exactly what happened with Laura. It all started innocently enough. Laura and her husband, Tom, moved into the house next door about a year ago. I remember meeting them for the first time when my wife, Emily, and I went over with a bottle of wine to welcome them to the neighborhood. They seemed like the perfect couple. Young, attractive, and always polite. Tom was a great guy. He and I got along well, and we'd often hang out in the backyard, drinking beers while talking about sports or grilling for our families. But it was Laura who caught my eye. From the beginning, there was something about her, something subtle but undeniable. She wasn't just attractive. She had this energy about her, this magnetic pull that made it hard not to notice her. Still, I kept my distance. I loved Emily, and we had been together for nearly 10 years. Things between us had gotten comfortable, maybe even a little predictable, but I never thought I'd stray. I'd always thought of myself as a faithful husband, someone who wouldn't let a passing attraction become anything more. But Laura was different. It was one evening after Tom had left for a work trip that things began to change. Emily was out of town visiting her sister, and I had the house to myself for the weekend. I was relaxing in the backyard when I heard someone call my name. "Hey, could you help me with something?" Laura's voice carried over the fence, and I stood up, walking toward her yard. She was standing at the side of her house, struggling with a broken garden hose. Her long brown hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and even though she was wearing just a simple tank top and shorts, she looked effortlessly beautiful. I tried not to let my eyes linger too long as I stepped into her yard. "Sure," I said, walking over. "What's going on?" She sighed, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "This hose is completely jammed. I've been trying to get it loose for the last 10 minutes. I knelt down to inspect it, feeling her standing just a little too close. My heart was racing in a way that I couldn't explain, but I focused on the task at hand, trying to ignore the growing tension between us. After a few minutes of fiddling with the hose, I finally got it loose. I stood up, brushing the dirt off my hands. "There you go," I said, smiling. "Good as new." "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft. "I don't know what I would have done without you." There was something in the way she said it, the way her eyes met mine, that made my stomach twist. It was subtle, but there was no mistaking the underlying tension in the air. I should have left right then and there, gone back to my house and pretended like nothing had happened. But instead, I found myself standing there, unable to pull away. "I'm just glad I could help," I said, my voice a little unsteady. She smiled, stepping closer. "You're always so helpful. Tom's always saying how lucky we are to have neighbors like you." The mention of her husband snapped me back to reality for a moment, and I forced a chuckle. Well, it's nice to have good neighbors. But Laura didn't back away. She took another step closer, her eyes locked on mine, and I could feel the heat between us rising. "Do you want to come inside for a drink?" she asked, her voice low. I hesitated, my mind racing. I knew what was happening here, and I knew it was wrong. But something about the way she looked at me, the way she spoke, made it impossible to say no. "Sure," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "Why not?" We stepped inside, the air-conditioned coolness of the house hitting me as the door clicked shut behind us. Laura walked into the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate, and I found myself watching her more closely than I should have. "Wine okay?" she asked, opening the fridge. "Yeah, wine's good," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She poured us both a glass and handed me one before leading the way into the living room. I followed, sitting down on the couch across from her. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, sipping our drinks. The tension between us was thick, and I could feel my pulse quickening. Laura broke the silence first. "So, you and Emily have been together for a while, huh?" she asked, swirling her wine glass. I nodded, not sure where this conversation was going. "Yeah, almost 10 years now." "That's impressive," she said, her eyes lingering on mine. "You must really love her." I swallowed hard, feeling a pang of guilt at the mention of my wife. "Yeah, I do." Laura smiled, but there was something in her expression that was hard to read. She leaned back on the couch, crossing her legs, and I couldn't help but notice how her tank top clung to her in all the right places. "I've been with Tom for a while too," she said softly. "But sometimes, I don't know, it feels like we're just going through the motions." Her words hit a little too close to home. I understood exactly what she meant. Emily and I weren't in a bad place, but we had definitely fallen into a routine. Things weren't exciting anymore. They weren't new. "I get that," I said quietly. "It's hard to keep that spark alive." Laura's eyes darkened, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I knew what she was thinking. I knew where this was heading, and I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. She set her wine glass down on the coffee table and stood up, walking over to where I was sitting. My breath caught in my throat as she sat down beside me, her body close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her skin. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to have that spark again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to look at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Her eyes were full of something, desire, curiosity, maybe even guilt, but all I could think about was how badly I wanted to kiss her. "I think about it sometimes," I admitted, my voice shaky. Laura leaned in, her lips just inches from mine. "Maybe we can find it together." Before I could stop myself, I closed the distance between us. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if we were both testing the waters. But then it deepened, and all the guilt, all the hesitation, melted away. Her hands moved to the back of my neck, pulling me closer as my own hands found her waist, the softness of her skin igniting something inside me that I hadn't felt in years. We lost ourselves in the moment, the world outside fading away. There was no Tom, no Emily, no consequences, just Laura and the way she made me feel alive again. But as the kiss intensified, reality began to creep back in. I pulled away, breathless, my mind racing with a mixture of desire and regret. "We shouldn't be doing this," I muttered, my voice thick with guilt. Laura looked at me, her lips swollen from the kiss, her eyes wide with something that looked like regret but wasn't quite there yet. "I know," she whispered, "but I don't want to stop." Neither did I. What happened that night changed everything. Laura and I crossed a line that neither of us could ignore, and once we had taken that first step, it was impossible to go back. We spent the rest of that evening wrapped up in each other, forgetting about the world outside, pretending that this was just between us, that it wouldn't affect anything else. But the truth was, it affected everything. The next morning, as I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee, the weight of what I had done hit me like a freight train. Emily was still out of town, but the guilt was suffocating. I couldn't shake the image of Laura, couldn't stop thinking about the way her touch had made me feel. What was I doing? How had I let things get this far? I knew I had to end it before it spiraled out of control. One mistake, one night of weakness, that was all it had been. But if I let it continue, if I allowed myself to keep giving in to this temptation, I would lose everything. Emily, my marriage, my family, it would all be gone. But as the days went by, I found myself drawn back to Laura. We tried to keep things normal, tried to act like nothing had changed between us. But every time I saw her, the tension was there, just beneath the surface. We'd share stolen glances, brush against each other when no one was looking, and every time, the pull between us grew stronger. It wasn't long before we were back in each other's arms, unable to resist the temptation that had consumed us both. We became careful, meeting in secret when Tom and Emily were away or distracted. It was exhilarating, dangerous, and completely unsustainable. I knew that, but I couldn't stop. Laura made me feel alive in a way Each day that passed, I told myself that I would end things with Laura. But every time I saw her, I couldn't resist the pull. It was as if she had this magnetic force over me. One that made me forget the guilt, forget the consequences, forget everything that wasn't the heat of the moment when we were together. The affair was intoxicating, exhilarating. But beneath the surface, the guilt gnawed at me like an open wound. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew I was betraying Emily, who trusted me completely. I hated myself for the lies, for the way I'd come home after being with Laura and act like nothing had happened. The worst part was that Emily hadn't suspected a thing. She believed in me, trusted me, and loved me in a way that made it almost unbearable to keep up the deception. But with Laura, there was something that made me feel alive again. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't just about the physical connection. It was something deeper. With her, I wasn't just the husband who handled bills or the father who picked up the kids. I was a man she desired, someone who excited her. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in so long, and I wasn't ready to give it up. One afternoon, about a month into the affair, we met at a hotel just outside of town. It had become our routine, finding places away from the neighborhood where we wouldn't be recognized. I told Emily I was meeting Tom to help him with some work at their house. It was a simple lie, one that I'd used too many times by now, but she believed it without question. Laura was waiting for me when I arrived. She was sitting on the bed, her legs crossed, that knowing smile on her face that made my pulse quicken the moment I walked through the door. As soon as the door closed behind me, she stood up and wrapped her arms around my neck, pulling me into a kiss that left no room for doubt about how the next few hours would unfold. "We have to be careful," I muttered between kisses, though I knew full well that I had thrown caution to the wind weeks ago. "We're always careful," she whispered back, her breath hot against my skin. But as much as I was caught up in the moment, a part of me knew that we weren't being careful enough. The secrecy of it all, the constant lying, it wasn't sustainable. Someone would find out. It was only a matter of time. We spent the next few hours together, lost in the same dangerous game we had been playing for weeks. But when it was over, when the haze of passion cleared, the guilt came rushing back in full force. "I can't keep doing this," I said, sitting up on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. "It's not fair to Emily. It's not fair to Tom." Laura sat up beside me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "I know," she whispered, "but it's hard to stop. I don't want to stop." Her words sent a wave of conflicted emotions through me. On one hand, I felt the same way. I didn't want to stop either. I didn't want to lose the excitement, the connection I had with Laura. But on the other hand, I knew it couldn't last. "We have to," I said finally, my voice thick with regret. "If we keep this up, we're going to get caught. And when we do, it's all over." Laura was quiet for a long time. Finally, she sighed and leaned her head on my shoulder. "I know you're right, but I don't know how to let go." Neither did I. We left the hotel that day without a clear answer, without a plan for how we were going to move forward. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living this double life. The weight of the lies was becoming too much to bear, and I was terrified of what would happen when everything came crashing down. As much as I tried to act normal around Emily, I could feel her starting to sense that something was off. She didn't ask outright, but there were little signs, hesitant glances, moments where her questions seemed to dig a little deeper than usual. One evening, as we were sitting together on the couch after putting the kids to bed, she turned to me with a look in her eyes that made my stomach twist. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft but full of concern. I forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as strained as it felt. "Yeah, everything's fine." "Why?" She shrugged, picking at the edge of the blanket draped across her lap. I don't know. You just seem a little distant lately, like something's on your mind. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to find the right words. I've just been busy with work and, the usual stuff. Nothing to worry about. Emily didn't seem entirely convinced, but she let it go, leaning her head against my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her, guilt twisting in my gut like a knife. How could I do this to her? How could I keep lying, night after night, knowing what I was doing behind her back? Later that night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't keep this up. Sooner or later, Emily was going to find out. And when she did, everything I had, my marriage, my family, the life we had built together, would be destroyed. But as much as I told myself it had to end, I couldn't stop. Laura and I were playing with fire, and every time I saw her, I was pulled deeper into the flames. A few days later, I got a text from Laura. It was short, simple, but it sent my heart racing. I need to see you. I hesitated for a moment, my mind torn between the guilt that was eating me alive and the overwhelming desire to be with her again. I knew what I should do. I should ignore the message, end things once and for all, and focus on repairing the damage I had done to my marriage. But instead, I texted her back. Meet me at the park. Usual spot. We met at a small, secluded park a few miles from our neighborhood. It was a place we'd gone to a few times before when we needed to talk without the risk of being seen. As soon as I saw Laura waiting for me, sitting on a bench under the shade of a large oak tree, I felt the familiar pull. But this time, there was something different in her eyes. She looked anxious, nervous in a way I hadn't seen before. Hey, I said, sitting down beside her. What's going on? Laura didn't look at me right away. She stared straight ahead, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Tom's starting to ask questions. My heart sank. What kind of questions? He's been noticing that I've been distracted. He doesn't know anything for sure, but I can tell he's suspicious. She finally turned to face me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and guilt. I don't know what to do. I ran a hand through my hair, the weight of the situation crashing down on me. If Tom was getting suspicious, it was only a matter of time before Emily did too. We had been playing this game for too long, and the cracks were starting to show. We need to stop, I said firmly, though the words felt like a lie even as I said them. We have to end this before it gets out of hand. Laura nodded slowly, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. I don't want to lose you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But you're right. We can't keep doing this. There was a long silence between us, both of us grappling with the reality of the situation. I had been fooling myself into thinking that we could keep this affair hidden, that we could somehow escape the consequences. But now it was clear that the walls were closing in. We sat there for what felt like hours, neither of us willing to be the first to walk away. Finally, I stood up, knowing that if I didn't leave now, I might never be able to. This is the last time, I said, my voice firm. It has to be. Laura looked up at me, her eyes filled with sadness. I know. I turned and walked away, the weight of my decision pressing down on me with every step. But as I left the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not really. The connection I had with Laura was too strong, too dangerous, and I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to break it for good. A few days later, everything came crashing down. Started with a phone call. I was at work when my phone buzzed on my desk. It was Emily. I answered, expecting her usual sweet tone, but the moment she spoke, I knew something was terribly wrong. You need to come home, she said, her voice cold and distant. My heart dropped. What's going on? Just come home. The drive back was a blur of panic and dread. I knew, without a doubt, that she had found out. Maybe it was something Tom had said, maybe she had figured it out on her own, or maybe Laura had broken under the pressure. Whatever the case, I knew the truth had come out. When I pulled into the driveway, Emily was standing at the door, her arms crossed over her chest, her face pale with anger and hurt. My stomach twisted as I stepped out of the car, the weight of what I had done suffocating me. "I know everything," she said the moment I walked up to her. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. There was nothing I could say, no excuse that would make this better. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around with Laura for months," Emily continued, her voice shaking with emotion. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" The anger in her eyes was almost too much to bear, but it was the hurt that destroyed me. I had done this. I had betrayed her in the worst possible way, and now I was standing in front of her, facing the consequences of my selfishness. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words feeling hollow even as I said them. "I never meant for it to go this far." Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I trusted you. I thought we were rebuilding, that we were getting stronger. And the whole time you were with her." I reached for her hand, desperate to make her understand, but she pulled away, stepping back as if I had burned her. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't even know if I want to." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. This was it. The moment I had been dreading, the moment I had known was coming from the second I first kissed Laura. And now everything I had, my marriage, my family, was crumbling around me. "I love you," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "I made a mistake, Emily, a huge mistake. But I want to fix this. I want to make it right." She stared at me for a long moment, the silence between us heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Finally, she wiped the tears from her face, her expression hardening. "I don't know if we can fix this," she said quietly, "but I need time. I need to figure out what I want." She turned and walked back into the house, leaving me standing there alone, the full weight of my choices pressing down on me like a tidal wave. As I watched her disappear through the door, I realized that the life I had taken for granted, the love I had so carelessly thrown away, might be gone forever. And it was all my fault. The door shut behind Emily, leaving me outside, numb. The weight of what had just happened sank deep into my chest, suffocating me. My legs felt weak as I sat down on the front steps, staring at the street, the familiar view of our quiet neighborhood suddenly feeling foreign. It was over. I knew it. My marriage was hanging by a thread, and I had no one to blame but myself. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to gather the courage to go inside. I knew the confrontation wasn't over. There would be more questions, more anger, and more tears. But I had to face it. I couldn't run from the truth any longer. Finally, I stood up, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The house was quiet, too quiet. Emily was in the kitchen, her back to me as she stared out the window. The tension in the room was thick, and I could feel the distance between us growing with every second that passed. I took a tentative step toward her. "Emily, don't," she said sharply, her voice cold and distant. She turned to face me, her eyes red from crying, her face pale with hurt and betrayal. "I can't even look at you right now." I swallowed hard, my throat tight with guilt. "I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. I never wanted to." "Stop." Her voice cracked, and she wiped at her eyes angrily. "Don't say you're sorry. Don't say you didn't mean for it to happen. You made a choice over and over again to lie to me. You betrayed me." Her words hit like a knife twisting in my gut, but I knew she was right. I had made the choice to keep seeing Laura. I had made the choice to betray the trust Emily had in me. And now, I was facing the consequences of my selfishness. "I don't know what you want me to say," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I messed up. I know that. I hurt you in the worst way possible, and I'll never forgive myself for that." but I want to make things right. I want to try to fix this. Emily let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Fix this? How can you fix this? You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back, sleeping with our neighbor. How do you even begin to fix something like that? I had no answer. The silence between us was deafening, and for a moment, I wondered if there was any point in even trying. Maybe this was it. Maybe I had destroyed everything beyond repair. But then Emily sighed, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of everything was too much for her to bear. I just need time, she said quietly. I need to figure out if I can even trust you again. I don't know what's going to happen, but right now, I can't do this. Not with you. My heart sank. What are you saying? She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. I think you should stay somewhere else for a while. Just give me some space to figure things out. The words were like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't argue with her. I had caused this. I had brought us to this point. If she needed space, I had to give it to her. Okay, I said, my voice hollow. I'll go. I packed a bag in silence. Each item I stuffed into the suitcase, feeling like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. I wanted to stay, to fight for what we had, but I knew that forcing myself into the situation would only make things worse. Emily needed time, and I had to respect that. When I walked back downstairs, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. She didn't look up when I came into the room, and my heart ached at the sight of her, so broken and hurt because of me. I'll be at a hotel, I said softly, though I wasn't sure she was listening. I'll give you all the space you need. She didn't respond, and I knew better than to push. So, without another word, I left. The hotel room was small and impersonal, a far cry from the warmth and familiarity of home. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank walls, feeling the full weight of my isolation. For the first time in years, I was alone, truly alone. The silence was suffocating. I picked up my phone, scrolling through the contacts, my thumb hovering over Laura's name. I hadn't spoken to her since Emily confronted me, and I didn't know if she even knew what had happened. Part of me wanted to call her, to see if she was going through the same thing with Tom. But the other part of me, the part that knew this affair had already destroyed too much, told me to leave it alone. Laura and I had crossed a line, and it had led us both to this point. Continuing down that path would only make things worse. I put the phone down and buried my face in my hands, trying to sort through the mess I had created. How had it come to this? How had I allowed myself to ruin everything? The next few days passed in a blur. I went to work, went back to the hotel, and repeated the cycle, all the while wondering if Emily would ever let me come back. We didn't talk much, just brief texts to check in on the kids or to let her know where I was. The distance between us felt insurmountable, and every day that passed without hearing her voice made me fear that I had lost her for good. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Tom. I hesitated for a moment before answering, my heart pounding in my chest. Hello. I know everything. His voice was cold, controlled, but there was a barely concealed anger beneath it. My stomach dropped. Tom, save it, he snapped. I don't want to hear your excuses. I just wanted to let you know that Laura's leaving. I don't know where she's going, and frankly, I don't care. But she's done with this, and so am I. His words hit me like a slap to the face. Laura was leaving? Just like that? I'm sorry, I said, my voice hollow. I never wanted any of this to happen. Well, it did, Tom replied, his voice filled with bitterness. And now we're both dealing with the consequences. You've got your own mess to clean up. Don't ever talk to me or my wife again. The line went dead, and I sat there in stunned silence. Laura was leaving. It was over. The affair that had turned my life upside down had come to an abrupt, crashing end. And now I was left to pick up the pieces. A few more weeks passed before Emily finally agreed to meet with me. She had kept her distance, focusing on the kids and trying to process everything. I had respected her need for space, but every day that went by without her felt like a punishment. When she finally called and asked me to meet her at a cafe downtown, my heart raced with both hope and fear. I didn't know what she was going to say, whether she was ready to talk about reconciliation or if this was the beginning of the end. I arrived early, my nerves on edge as I sat at the table, waiting for her to show up. When she finally walked in, she looked different. Not in a bad way, but in a way that told me she had changed. She was stronger, more determined, and as she sat down across from me, I knew that whatever happened today, it wouldn't be easy. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything between us hanging in the air. "I've been thinking a lot," Emily said finally, her voice steady. "About us, about what you did, and about what I want moving forward." I nodded, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. "I'm hurt, Jake, more than I've ever been in my life. You broke my trust, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully trust you again." Her words cut deep, but I knew she was right. I had shattered her trust in a way that couldn't be easily repaired. "But," she continued, her voice softening, "I've also realized that I still love you, and I'm willing to try to give this a chance. But it's going to take time, a lot of time, and I need to know that you're committed to fixing this, to rebuilding what we had." I felt a surge of relief and hope, but I didn't let it overwhelm me. "I am," I said earnestly. "I'll do whatever it takes, Emily. I'll go to counseling, I'll give you all the time you need. I just want a chance to make things right." Emily nodded, though there was still a distance in her eyes. "We'll see. I'm not making any promises, but we'll try. For the kids. For us." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. A fragile, tentative start. Over the next few months, we began the slow, painful process of rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't easy. Every day was a struggle, filled with moments of doubt and anger. But we went to therapy, we communicated more openly than we ever had before, and slowly, brick by brick, we began to lay the foundation for something new. There were still days when the weight of what had happened felt too heavy to bear, when Emily would look at me with a sadness that broke my heart all over again. But we kept going. We kept fighting for each other, for our family. Laura had disappeared from our lives completely. She and Tom divorced, and I never heard from her again. It was better that way. She was a chapter in my life that needed to be closed. And while I still carried the guilt of what I had done, I knew that I had been given a second chance. Something I didn't deserve but was grateful for nonetheless. Every day, I made the choice to stay, to fight for the life I had almost thrown away. And every day, I hoped that one day, Emily would be able to look at me and see the man she fell in love with again. The months after that conversation with Emily felt like walking through a minefield. Every word, every gesture seemed like it could trigger an explosion of unresolved anger and hurt. But we kept moving forward, one painful step at a time. Counseling became our lifeline. Every week, we sat in a small room with Dr. Reynolds, our therapist, and laid our emotions bare. Emily spoke openly about the depth of her pain, about the betrayal and the countless nights she spent wondering how long I had been lying to her. I shared my guilt, my regret, and the realization that I had nearly destroyed the best thing in my life. "I still don't understand how you could do it," Emily said during one of our sessions, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "We were rebuilding. We were trying to fix things. And you chose her." The weight of her words hung in the air, and I could see the raw emotion in her eyes. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about the choice I had made to step outside of our marriage, even when we were supposed to be fixing it. "I wasn't thinking clearly," I said softly, struggling to find the right words. "I was lost in my own selfishness. I let things with Laura spiral out of control because it was easier than facing the problems we had. I know that now, and I'm sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life being sorry for what I did." Emily's eyes were wet with unshed tears, but she nodded, taking a deep breath. I need to know that this won't happen again, that I can trust you, Jake, because right now, I don't know how to get that trust back. Dr. Reynolds chimed in, her voice calm and reassuring. Trust is something that will take time, Emily. It's not something you have to rush. But Jake, you need to be prepared for the fact that rebuilding trust won't be easy. It will take consistent effort, day after day. I nodded, feeling the weight of the task ahead. I wanted to prove to Emily that I was worth trusting again, but I knew it would be a long, difficult road. Still, I was determined to do whatever it took. When the sessions ended, we left the therapist's office together, the tension between us slightly less suffocating than when we had walked in. But there was still a distance. We drove home in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. That night, as we lay in bed, the space between us felt enormous, even though we were only inches apart. For months now, intimacy had been a distant memory. The emotional wall between us made it impossible to get close, to feel like we were on the same page again. I glanced over at Emily, her back turned to me, and felt a deep ache. I missed her. I missed the closeness we used to have, the simple comfort of being together without the weight of betrayal hanging over us. But I didn't want to push her. She had every right to take her time, to work through her feelings at her own pace. Good night, I whispered, knowing she might not respond. She didn't say anything at first, and for a moment, I thought she had fallen asleep. But then, just as I was about to close my eyes, she spoke, her voice soft and tentative. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you the way I used to, she said quietly. But I'm trying. My heart twisted at her words, but there was also a glimmer of hope. She was trying, and that was more than I deserved. I love you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Emily didn't respond, but the fact that she was still there, still lying beside me, was enough for now. Weeks turned into months, and while the road to rebuilding our marriage was long, there were moments of light amidst the darkness. Emily and I began to reconnect, slowly, cautiously. We started going on dates again, quiet dinners at familiar restaurants, walks around the park, moments where we could be together without the pressure of fixing everything all at once. There were still bad days, of course. Days when the hurt resurfaced, when Emily would pull away from me emotionally, and I would feel the distance between us grow again. But those moments became less frequent as time went on. One evening, after a particularly good day spent together, Emily sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting lightly on mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental given how far we had come. I've been thinking, she said softly, her eyes focused on the TV, though I could tell her mind was elsewhere. I want to start moving forward again. I want us to really try. I turned to her, my heart pounding. You mean that? She nodded, her eyes meeting mine. I do, but it's going to take time. I need to feel like we're on the same page again, like we're building something real. I couldn't help but smile, relief washing over me. We can take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. She smiled back, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a glimmer of the old Emily, the woman I had fallen in love with years ago. There was still hope for us. We weren't out of the woods yet, but we were getting there, step by step. We spent that night curled up on the couch, watching movies like we used to before everything had gone wrong. It was the first time in months that I felt like things might actually work out, like we had a chance at rebuilding something strong from the wreckage of my mistakes. Things between us continued to improve, but just when I thought we were making real progress, a new challenge arose, one that tested the fragile trust we had been working so hard to rebuild. One evening, Emily came home from work with a strange look on her face. I had been cooking dinner, and when I saw her standing in the doorway, I could tell something was off. Everything okay? I asked, setting down the spoon I had been using to stir the sauce. She hesitated for a moment before walking into the kitchen, setting her bag down on the counter. I got a message today. From Laura. My heart stopped. What? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, her eyes serious. She sent me a message on Facebook. She wanted to talk. Panic surged through me. Why would Laura reach out to Emily? Hadn't she left? Hadn't she disappeared from our lives for good? What did she say? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Emily pulled out her phone and handed it to me, showing me the message. It was short but direct. Hey, Emily. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I think we should talk. There are some things I need to say. Let me know if you're willing to meet. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Why now? What could Laura possibly have to say that she hadn't already? And more importantly, why would Emily even consider meeting her? I didn't respond, Emily said, taking her phone back. But I wanted to talk to you about it first. I nodded, relief washing over me. I don't think you should meet with her. Whatever she has to say, it can't be good. Emily studied my face for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. Do you think she's trying to cause more problems? Or do you think she's just trying to make amends? I didn't know. Part of me wanted to believe that Laura had finally realized the damage she had caused and was looking to apologize. But the other part of me, the part that still felt the sting of guilt every time I thought about what we had done, feared that this was another attempt to drag me back into the chaos. I don't trust her, I said honestly. And I don't want her anywhere near us, Emily. We've worked too hard to move forward. She'll only set us back. Emily nodded slowly, but there was still uncertainty in her eyes. I won't respond to her, but I need to know that you're being honest with me, Jake. If there's anything else I need to know, you need to tell me now. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. This was my chance to come clean, to lay everything on the table. But the truth was, I had already told her everything. I had been as honest as I could be about what had happened between Laura and me. There were no more secrets left. I've told you everything, I said quietly. I promise. Emily looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing my words, and finally, she nodded. Okay, I believe you. Her words were a balm to the raw wound that had been festering between us for so long. She believed me, and that was all I needed to hear. The message from Laura hung over us for a few more days, but eventually, it faded into the background. Emily didn't respond, and Laura didn't send any more messages. Seemed like, for now, she had finally let go. Life slowly began to settle back into a new normal. Emily and I were finding our rhythm again, rebuilding trust and connection, and focusing on the future instead of the past. We had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same team. One night, as we sat together on the back porch, watching the stars, Emily leaned her head on my shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. We've come a long way, haven't we? She said softly. I nodded, my heart swelling with gratitude. Yeah, we have. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a softness that I hadn't seen in months. I still love you, Jake. I want you to know that. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. Hearing those words from her, after everything we had been through, felt like a gift I didn't deserve. I love you too, I whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. And I'm never going to take that for granted again. We sat there in comfortable silence, the past finally feeling like something we could leave behind. There would always be scars, always memories of the mistakes I had made, but we were stronger now. We had fought for our marriage, and we had won. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were going to be okay. As time passed, I began to feel a sense of normalcy again. Emily and I were finally rebuilding, and the cracks in our marriage were slowly being mended. We had fallen into a routine, dates on the weekends, family dinners with the kids, and evenings spent talking about our day. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was better than I had hoped for. The tension that had once dominated our home was starting to fade, and for the first time in months, I felt like we had a future together again. But as much as I wanted to believe that everything was behind us, there was still an uneasiness lingering beneath the surface. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but every now and then, I would catch a flicker of doubt in Emily's eyes. It was the same doubt that had haunted us ever since the affair. Still, I pushed it aside, telling myself that we were past the worst of it. Then, one afternoon, everything changed again. I was at work when I got a text from Emily. "We need to talk tonight." My heart sank. Those 4 words were enough to send my mind spiraling. What could it be this time? Had she found out something else? Was she having second thoughts about our marriage? I tried to focus on my work, but the anxiety gnawed at me all day. By the time I got home, my nerves were frayed. Emily was sitting in the living room, her face serious, and I knew right away that something was wrong. "I got another message," she said quietly, not looking up from her phone. My stomach dropped. "From Laura?" Emily nodded, her jaw clenched. "She wants to meet." I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. Why was Laura still reaching out? What more could she possibly want? We had ended things, both between her and me, and between her and Tom. There was no reason for her to be in our lives anymore. "I don't understand," I said, running a hand through my hair. "What does she want now?" Emily finally looked up at me, her eyes full of frustration and something else. Fear, maybe. She didn't say, but I'm tired of her hanging over us like this. I think I should meet with her. My heart raced. "Emily, no. I don't think that's a good idea. I need to hear what she has to say, Jake," Emily said, her voice firm. "I need closure. I need to know if there's more to this than you've told me." The accusation stung, but I couldn't blame her for feeling that way. After everything that had happened, after all the lies I had told, it made sense that she would doubt me. But meeting with Laura? That felt like a mistake, a dangerous one. "I've told you everything," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "There's nothing more to tell. Laura reaching out again is just her trying to stir things up. She's probably lonely, looking for someone to mess with." Emily shook her head, her expression hardening. "I'm meeting with her, Jake. I need to do this for me." I wanted to argue, to convince her that it was a bad idea, but I could see in her eyes that she wasn't going to change her mind. She needed this, and I wasn't in a position to stop her. "When?" I asked, my voice tense. "Tomorrow," she replied. She suggested a coffee shop downtown. "It's a public place, so nothing's going to happen." I didn't like it. In fact, I hated the idea of Emily sitting across from Laura, of her hearing whatever Laura had to say. But I had no choice but to trust her. Trust that she would hear Laura out and then walk away. "All right," I said reluctantly. "But be careful, okay?" Emily nodded, standing up from the couch. "I will. And Jake, I hope you're telling me the truth." "I really do." I wanted to reach out to her, to reassure her, but the distance between us felt too great in that moment. Instead, I watched as she walked upstairs, leaving me alone with the sinking feeling that things were about to get much worse. The next day passed in a blur of anxiety. Emily had been quiet that morning, focused on getting the kids ready for school, and we hadn't talked about the meeting again. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest since she told me about the message. I hated not knowing what Laura was going to say. I hated that Emily was walking into a situation that felt unpredictable and dangerous. That afternoon, when Emily left for the coffee shop, I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for something bad to happen. I couldn't focus on anything, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. After what felt like hours, my phone buzzed. It was Emily. "I'm on my way home. We need to talk." My stomach twisted, and I felt a fresh wave of panic. What had Laura said? What had Emily found out? When she walked through the door, her face was unreadable. She didn't say anything at first, just set her purse down and sat on the edge of the couch. I stood there, waiting for her to speak, the tension between us unbearable. "Laura told me some things," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the floor. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What did she say?" Emily looked up at me, her eyes filled with hurt. "She said you weren't the only one." The words hung in the air, and for a moment I didn't understand. "What?" "She said there were others," Emily said, her voice shaking. "Other women. Before her." My heart stopped. "That's not true," I said quickly, my voice rising with panic. "She's lying, Emily. She's trying to manipulate you." Emily stared at me, her expression filled with doubt and pain. "Is she, Jake? Because after everything that's happened, I don't know what to believe anymore." I felt the ground shifting beneath me. Laura was lying. Of course she was. I had never cheated on Emily before Laura. She was the first, and I had already told Emily everything. But how could I convince her of that? How could I make her believe me when Laura had planted seeds of doubt? "I swear to you, Emily," I said, taking a step toward her. "There was no one else. Laura's trying to mess with your head. But I'm telling you the truth. There were no other women." Emily watched me carefully, her eyes searching mine for any sign of deception. I could see the war raging inside her, the battle between the desire to believe me and the fear that I was lying again. Finally, she took a deep breath and stood up. "I need time to think." I reached for her hand, desperate to keep her from walking away. "Emily, please, don't let her get into your head. She's just trying to destroy what we've rebuilt." She pulled her hand away, her face pale with emotion. "I don't know, Jake. I don't know what to believe anymore." And with that, she turned and walked upstairs, leaving me standing there, heartbroken and terrified that everything we had worked so hard for was slipping away. The next few days were tense, the house filled with an uncomfortable silence. Emily kept her distance, retreating into herself as she tried to process what Laura had said. Couldn't blame her. After everything I had put her through, it made sense that she would question me, that she would doubt every word that came out of my mouth. But Laura's lie was a cruel twist, a final, desperate attempt to ruin everything. I knew I had to fight for our marriage. I couldn't let Laura's manipulation destroy the fragile trust that Emily and I had rebuilt. But every time I tried to talk to Emily, she shut down, refusing to engage. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window. "Emily, we need to talk," I said, my voice soft but firm. She didn't look at me, her gaze still focused on the darkened yard. "What's there to talk about, Jake? You say Laura's lying," but she seemed so certain. I walked over to the table and sat down across from her. "Because she's trying to get back at us. She's angry that things didn't work out between us, and now she's trying to poison whatever chance we have left." Emily finally turned to face me, her eyes filled with pain. "I want to believe you, Jake, but I'm so tired of the lies. I'm tired of being hurt." I reached for her hand, my voice trembling with emotion. "I swear to you, Emily, there were no other women. Laura's the only one. I know I've made mistakes, but I've been completely honest with you since the affair ended. I've told you everything. Please, believe me." She was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching mine for any trace of deceit. I could see the hesitation in her face, the battle she was fighting between her heart and her mind. Finally, she let out a deep sigh and nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I want to believe you. I really do." Relief washed over me, and I squeezed her hand. "Thank you. I promise, Emily, I'll never lie to you again. We'll get through this." She wiped at her tears and gave me a small, tentative smile. "Okay." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we could move past this. Maybe, just maybe, we could finally put Laura and everything she had tried to destroy behind us for good. The next few weeks were a blur of healing, talking, and rebuilding. Emily and I spent more time together, focusing on reconnecting and finding our way back to each other. The shadow of Laura still lingered over us, but it was growing smaller with each passing day. Counseling helped. We went to more sessions, digging deep into the issues that had led us to this point. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt and hurt, but we were making progress. We were learning how to communicate in ways we hadn't before, and for the first time I felt like we were truly rebuilding from the ground up. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Emily leaned her head on my shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "We're going to be okay, right?" she asked softly. I smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Yeah, we're going to be okay." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I truly believed it.